let's talk about coronavirus. I specifically want to link it back to China and in talking about the kosher way of doing things. I have been kosher for I think the past 11 and a half years. No pork, no shellfish, very aware of the food chain and not eating the food at the bottom, but instead at the top as far as the animals go. And as we're learning about the coronavirus, we have learned it's from wet markets in China, where it's basically a zoo, because people in China, especially in rural China, they don't have access to the food that a lot of countries do normally. So their government has incentives for them to, whatever animal you can bring to the market and sell it, if people eat it, so be it. That rhymed, I didn't mean for it to. So people are eating bats, right? People are eating cats. And when you have cats sitting in cages on top of chickens, and then they poop and pee on those and they eat the chicken, and then there's bats. I mean, there's diseases spreading in between animals and species to humans, because normally that wouldn't exist. You wouldn't have all of these things stacked on top of each other like this, these animals and the people eating them. But at these wet markets in China, where people are already so poor and desperate, that's what they're doing, that's how it gets here. So the whole point of this video, though, is to explore the concept of being kosher. And similar for people who are Muslim, they're very aware of the food chain, eating the food at the top, not eating pork, whether you're Jewish or you're Muslim, not eating pork, and staying away from the bottom feeder animals. But when you look at China and what they're known for eating, they're eating all the animals that we would never eat here in the United States. Things that are taboo here, like who would ever think of eating a bat or a cat? But over there, out of desperation, they are, and they're selling this to each other to eat. So it's interesting to me, almost from a religious perspective, when you think of it this way. When you look at, because if I'm not mistaken, the number 2 most popular religions in the world is number 1 Christianity, and then right behind it is Islam. Imagine they got that part right. I mean, if nothing else, they're onto something. If you are staying away from animals at the bottom of the food chain, and especially when they're so close to each other, it only makes sense that this whole thing is not just because of obedience to God. It's to keep people healthy. You're less likely to get sick and get diseases if you're eating animals like pork or bottom feeders. It makes perfect sense, and that's largely why I continue to do so. I started out actually because I had a skin condition called dyshidrosis on my hand, and when I stopped eating pork and shellfish, it went away. That was part of my journey to getting healed there. So it is interesting. And again, I've said in these videos, my mother's DNA test points back to being Sephardic Jewish, and as well as West Asian, which is Iran, Turkey, Iraq. And look, imagine that. Imagine that her heritage and mine comes from people who have not been eating pork or shellfish because they knew not to, but also me being a descendant of that, I was eating pork and shellfish, and it caused me to have this disease. So it totally makes sense. But when I went into the way my ancient ancestors were doing, then it goes away. I don't think that's a coincidence. So ultimately what I'm saying is, if the world were kosher, would we be dealing with coronavirus? That's my question. Your comments are right here.